We're going to be exploring growth and customer acquisition tonight, mostly from perspectives of B2C businesses. And to guide us on that journey, we've got an incredible roster of panelists behind me to take us there. And they've all seen it from a range of different perspectives. And if I may just quickly introduce each of them, and I'll do my best. We'll start with Jose. Jose, correct me if I'm wrong, you started life at McKinsey, and you worked on several industries, including the placement as Chief of Staff to the CEO of Whaling. Following that, you did your MBA at HBS, and took those experiences and started a fashion company that you then sold to Chapar. And that kind of kicked off your fashion world experience. You then ran global fashion group for Rocket Internet, and for the last 3 years, you've been COO at Lyst and a member of the board. So, Jamie, you are at Deliveroo, and you started life out at Deloitte, the consulting arm of Deloitte, and then completed your MBA at Columbia. You then went to Amazon for about 4 years, working quite fittingly across a range of fashion-related departments, and finally as a senior manager on Prime Now. You then joined Deliveroo, and you're now the global marketing director. And fun fact that I found, you've spent the first year at Deliveroo working on the largest ever dynamic radio campaign in the UK. This had more than 60,000 variations, tailored by day of the week, time, location, weather, and so on and so forth. So incredible stuff. Catherine, or Katie, you started life out at JP Morgan in New York City and worked across a range of functions, including institutional sales and asset management. You then went to HBS, where you met Jose and did your MBA. And Jen joined American Express, where you worked with some incredible people, including Ken Chenot, the CEO, who's a kind of legendary figure across New York City and London in product and marketing. So you then moved to the UK and kind of ran digital acquisition in the United Kingdom. And then after that, you went to Nutmeg and became their CMO. You now left earlier this year at Nutmeg and joined as a co-founder and CMO of a company called Harness Wealth, which is launching very soon, imminently, maybe tomorrow. And we are very proud backers of that company based out of New York City. Tristan, you joined Monzo in the very early days. I think you were telling me you were 15th employee there. And you've worn all manner of hats across that company, but especially kind of community management, product management, and marketing. And I think that's really unsurprising and telling, because I think Monzo, the growth story of Monzo is probably down to that interesting mix of those three things. And obviously you're going to hopefully tell us more about that later. And Tommy, who's our wonderful moderator, and also venture partner and limited partner at First Minute Capital. He does focus his investing on the United States, where he's found us a range of really exciting deals, which many we've been tempted into doing, and kind of has a penchant for consumer. He is the co-founder of a company called Swing Technologies, which exited to Microsoft in 2017. Swing was shared by Twitter co-founder Biz Stone, and it was the #1 app on the App Store. And he is also the best-selling author of Connect, How Companies Succeed by Engaging Radically with Society, written with a former BP CEO, Lord Brown. And fun fact about Tommy, amazingly, he was a speechwriter for then Senator Barack Obama, which I always find amazing. So I hope you learned a thing or two about public speaking, Tommy, as you're going to be chairing the discussion tonight. Look, without further ado, please welcome the panelists and have a great evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Elliot, very much for that introduction. I may not hit the heights of Obama tonight, but if I don't do better than Mr. Trump, you can all ask for your money back. I promise. So I'm going to get straight into it. We've got an amazing panel. We've got a panel who together have built companies here in the UK with a valuation together of over $4 billion. So some amazing people. We're going to talk about growth, we're going to talk about user acquisition, and based on what Elliot tells me about the audience, we're going to try and make this as actionable as possible. We're really going to try and tease out some really useful things that everyone can take away and do in their own companies. We're going to talk about growth and user acquisition, as I said. It feels like we're at a bit of an inflection point. We've come with this huge wave of direct-to-consumer companies and platforms, which in some ways have benefited from cheap paid marketing and the growth really of paid marketing. Now we hear from Social Capital's latest report that 40% of dollars going into venture-backed startups are ending up back at Facebook, Amazon, and Google through this huge addiction to paid marketing. So tonight, hopefully, we can tease out what are some of the other approaches beyond just paid. What are the smart tactics that you've used in your careers? And I think what would be good to start with is to maybe take it back to the early days of all of your companies that you're now with or well with, and try and understand what were the guerrilla tactics, the clever things that you did very early on, or your companies did very early on, that people can learn from now that you look back on with pride. So I think probably, Tristan, you'd be a brilliant person to start this off with. Tell us maybe the story of Monzo and the use of referrals, your golden ticket program, the use of crowdfunding, all these brilliant things that you did to create this amazing brand and to acquire users at low cost or even free.
Yeah. Hello. There we go. So I joined Monzo 3 and a bit years ago, and at the time we had no customers, no product. And so to start off, we just had this page on our website which had an email sign-up form. And that was literally our product. We did a lot of marketing around it. Our first, probably 10,000 people who signed up there, mainly came through Facebook ads, actually. And then since then, we've done very little paid marketing, but they were our sort of first core group of people that we got signed up. So we got them to put in their email addresses, and then they went through this sort of joined a waiting list for the product. And at that point, that's when we started to experiment with early referrals. So gave people a number, I think. Actually, at the beginning, we didn't even have a number. We just said, if you invite a few friends, we'll get you your card sooner. Over time, we got some tracking, so that actually happened. And that was the beginning for us of seeing the strength of this sort of scarcity combined with the waitlist. And once we launched the app, we then built that into the app and sort of supercharged it with golden tickets. And since then, that's been 80% of our growth.
80% of the growth from referrals?
Well, from referrals and word of mouth. So yeah, 40% directly from referrals through golden tickets, and the other 40% through word of mouth.
And how much of that do you attribute down to it being an amazing brand, an amazing product, and just, you actually got the product right, build it and it will come, versus incredibly clever use of referrals, the way you branded the referral campaign? So tell us about the balance there.
Yeah, I don't know, it's really hard to say. I think it's all about the brand. But we actually stayed away from doing golden tickets, which was this concept where you could invite a friend and then they would skip the waiting list for a long time. And so we just did standard referrals where you'd invite someone and then you would move up. Because we didn't want to use golden tickets until it felt like we had enough people on there to make it worthwhile. It felt at the time like a sort of one-trick pony, so giving out golden tickets when we only had 50,000 people on the waiting list seemed like it could be a waste. They'll go and send them out and then it won't be any use after that. We were wrong actually, and then they turned out to sort of be a continuous driver of growth. But there's just something in that feeling like all you get is you skip the waiting list, and many times the waiting list was a day, so you don't actually get that much benefit, but the feel of getting something exclusive, something that's really scarce, just resonated really, really well for people. And then 6 months ago we got rid of the waiting list but kept golden tickets, and people still use them, and they literally have no benefit at all, except they're golden. So.
Amazing. Awesome. And what about the brand? You touched on the brand. I remember being in bars in London back at that time when you were launching, and there was just this fervour. Could you get your hand on a Monzo card, like a debit card? And it wasn't even a real debit card at that point, in the true sense. Tell us about that. How did you build a brand which was so loved from the very beginning, which created such hype? How did you do that?
So I think a combination of accidents, like the card colour, which was chosen by a head of design in the summer of 2015 to sort of signify that this was a test card. And on our website, we always had this beautiful dark blue card. We kept that on our website for a year, and it was only after about a year that we realised maybe hot cross
through why you did that, how you did that, and what impact it had on growth.
I see it as basically the pinnacle of community engagement. If you sort of draw this graph in my mind, and on the x-axis you have sort of commitment to do an action, and on the y-axis is sort of impact of doing that action. And try and plot community activities along that graph so that there's something for everyone. The ideal would be something that requires no effort for customers, but is sort of hugely impactful. Haven't found that yet. But so you sort of work your way up, maybe following us on social media or voting on a new feature is right at the bottom. It's very easy, but it doesn't actually get you that involved. You work your way up, an event, sort of quite a lot of effort. You have to come out for the evening, and it gets you quite involved. And then crowdfunding is just that pinnacle where you have to literally pay money. But once you're invested, it changes your relationship with the company totally. And we let people invest £10 as a minimum, and most people invest £10. It's by far the most common investment. And people aren't doing that for a return, especially nowadays, but they're doing it because just this sort of emotional connection with the company where they've bought into it. And then you have to tell all your friends because you've just invested. So.
Amazing. Add it to your LinkedIn profile as well, very quickly.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing those stories from the early days. Jamie, I'd love to turn to you and talk about Deliveroo. How did Deliveroo become Deliveroo in terms of growth in the very early days?
Yes, so before my time, so I'm just going to share the war stories with you that I know. But the interesting thing about Deliveroo is that it's really different neighborhood by neighborhood. So if I would open up the app and order now, I would have a completely different experience in terms of the restaurants available to me than if I would do that where I live in Islington or in Madrid or in Melbourne. And so when I think about how Will started this business, it was literally that he was sitting at home in South Kensington and couldn't get anything delivered. And he literally walked up and down the street that he lived on to the restaurants that he himself liked and tried to sell the restaurant owner on getting on the platform. And the way that marketing started and that customer acquisition took off really was the same sort of way. It was looking neighborhood by neighborhood, and it was using really, really old school tactics. So at the very, very beginning, we got these door hangers printed, like the kind that are the do not disturb hangers that you see at a hotel. And they said knock, knock on them, and it had, like 4 or 5 restaurants that we had available on the platform. And like literally the team went door by door themselves and would hang them up. And it was the best acquisition method I've ever seen. It was like super cheap to get them printed. It was, but it got the word out there that you can now get these restaurants delivered to your home on Deliveroo, on this thing called Deliveroo. And at the time, it was just a site. It wasn't an app. It wasn't mobile optimized. Like, it was a huge mess. But the other thing that was amazing about it, and you had asked a question earlier about, kind of product versus marketing, is that there was amazing product market fit for this service because there was no one doing anything like it in London. And so literally the only way that you could get these restaurants delivered was through Deliveroo at that time. And we've gone on a tremendous journey since then that has really had to change our marketing mix as a result of the competition that we've seen enter the market.
Got it. And you obviously were building a platform from the very beginning. You had to acquire users and customers on both sides of it. How did you balance that then? How do you balance it now?
It's definitely been a learning experience. Like, I can share, as recently as I joined in January of 2017, and our Q4 of January 2017 was a learning experience for us all in that we were growing at such a amazing rate, which is truly incredible, right? But when you have that sort of demand for your product, you have to keep up the other side. You have to keep up the supply side. So that means that restaurants have to actually be able to fulfill the orders that you're providing, and that you have to have the riders to be able to deliver the restaurants. And we, I will say, like, we failed in Q4 of 2017. And if any of you are Deliveroo users, you may have noticed that our service really, really took a turn because we really struggled to get riders on board to support the growth that we were seeing. And we've taken a lot of learning since then. And like back in the early days, I can't speak for it directly because I wasn't there, but we have a ton of war stories about like hacking different things together. And I think one of the things the business has done amazingly is built on that and built systems that prevent those types of errors or that reduce human error to figure out how many riders do we think that we need to have in order to deliver our demand? How can we make sure that those riders are participating during our peak hours? How can we make sure that we're incentivizing those riders to participate when it's like chucking down rain and everyone in London is, happy to order food, but no one really wants to ride around and deliver it? So in terms of marketing, it's a really complex environment and much more complex than what I had to deal with when I was at Amazon, because you have to consider all of those different pieces coming together. And so when you think about fueling your demand fire, say you do find channels that work really, really well for you and you're willing to pay for them, if you can't keep up on the supply side, then it's wasted money.
Absolutely. Jose, does that resonate with you?
Well, we don't have those peaks always. Maybe now in Christmas and Black Friday we have one. We had one that was quite large, but it happens definitely at a bigger scale. In the sense like less city by city, moment by moment. I think that's a huge complexity and also a big advantage if you do it well in that business. We don't have something like that. For us, maybe the story is a bit different. So. Yeah, I joined the company 3 years and a half ago, but funny enough, I know the founders from the beginning because when I started my company here in London, I was meeting with them every now and then, and they were telling me the stories, the war stories. And then basically after, when I joined, I saw the consequences of some of the hacks and things that were done there. But I think the story is quite genius because basically we had this mindset where one of our co-founders, which is Seb, CTO, type of thing. So he started like playing with stuff and having a lot of fun. So he was trying a bunch of different things and iterating about how we could get discovered by users. So in our case, for example, search engine optimization played a big role, like a SEO, right? So I think that Seb had like this curious mind where people would tell them, don't do this, don't do that, this is not the way it works, etc. And he would say, yeah, sure. And it's very interesting because even today he keeps that mindset where he's more about trying, experimenting, playing with things and see how they play out. And in a couple of occasions he hit something and that's been like, boom, and then suddenly demand spikes and trying different approaches, like literally hacking the way to grow. And then I think that mindset is very important at the beginning because when you're starting, like I think if you just basically base everything you do on conventional wisdom, or you probably are not going to get an edge, right? And I think like basically think for first principles, try everything, form your own opinion, kind of take a point of view on how to do things. Is very important because otherwise you just end up doing the same as everyone. And the thing with marketing channels is like either you try something new and inventive or you end up paying the party doing paid or any other channel saturates very fast. So I think you need to be a bit like inventive in a way, right? Then the other thing I was going to say is like at the beginning what it was very important is not only to have that mindset but also think about product and growth like almost like together. And I think that even applies today for us and probably for most companies, which a lot of the product core decisions definitely have a big impact on how you can grow, right? So normally when you are at the beginning, you want to validate that you have some value or hypothesis that you are adding value to the user, but also how you deliver that is going to mark very strongly how you can grow. So some models naturally have elements of organic growth together. So by basically cracking the value proposition in a given way, it's going to give you years of growth to come. So one example is Pinterest. So these guys basically are solving the problem of I'm bored and I want to browse through my interests in a visual way. But then basically every time each user basically pins something, saves something, creates a board, that's like a massive SEO play where basically they are generating content, user-generated content that they can index, and then basically that's how they get their traffic, right? So the two things are very related, and sometimes we don't talk about them in tandem when they are very, very together, right? So in the case of Lyst, it was very clear the same thing. Like initially, they started to play a little bit with the idea of social shopping because that could bring a lot of referrals, and then basically people bring other people. But then we were struggling a little bit with the value proposition, and then basically we migrated to a different model that was more search-based, which is what we have today. But I would say, like, keep it, like, be very curious, play a lot, like, don't go for, even assumptions for what you read or what you see. Play.
Got it. Good, great advice. Thank you, Katie. You were CMO at Nutmeg. You're a great guinea pig for the audience, I think, in some ways, because you have, I assume, taken some incredible experience from Nutmeg, and you are now literally tomorrow or in the next, whatever, few hours, going to be launching your new startup on as well. What were the smart things that happened at Nutmeg that you have taken on board and said, now we're going to apply it either in exactly the same way or in a slightly different way with Harness?
Yeah, I guess the first thing is it's slightly different businesses what we're doing versus what we did at Nutmeg, but there were a couple of things when Nutmeg launched, and I wasn't there at the time, so it's war stories again that I've heard from my team. I joined Nutmeg post-Series C. But there's a couple of things that they did that worked really well, and there's some stuff that they did that didn't work as well, and a lot of those things are things that we're feeding into how we're approaching the launch for Harness as well. So one of the things that hasn't been mentioned that Nutmeg did really well from the beginning was PR. Nick Hungerford, the founder, was just fantastic at PR. He was all over broadcast, he was all over print, he made great relationships, and for an investment brand, building a brand that is respected and a brand that shows that level of expertise, PR is just a fantastic way to do that. The other thing that they did really well at Nutmeg, which has been touched on by some of the other panelists, is this combination of thinking about building a really strong product. And you asked sort of before, was it the product or is it the marketing? It's both. Like, you have to have both. And the team built really a fantastic product, very customer focused, very sort of smooth onboarding, and that product in conjunction with some of the work that Nick was doing really helped grow that brand. And I think what worked well for us at the time at Nutmeg was because of those things in combination, we really got strong referrals, which is sort of similar to, I think, what Monzo saw. So those are things that worked really well.
As you look at your companies now at the more mature stage, but also at startups, what would your advice be to yourselves, to startups? Are we addicted to paid? Jose, maybe we could start with you.
Sure. So, yeah, it's a long topic, but so I do think that some companies get hooked to it, right? It's very easy to get hooked, and the trick goes this way, right? Like, you start a company, you have a level of LTV in your customers or whatever value you can extract. Maybe the retention is not so great, but you have something, and then you say, okay, now I have this level of referrals and organic and word of mouth, and then I'm gonna start putting a little bit of paid, right? And the numbers look very good. You say, okay, we're gonna start ramping this up, right? And what happens is that the numbers start to get worse because one, you are like potentially looking at aggregated like blended numbers versus just like properly attributed costs. Very easy to be deceived by that and say, okay, we have a relatively good average cost of acquisition, and then basically what happens is that you start, raising more money, putting the foot on the gas, and then you start spending more. And what happens, what normally is that your organic acquisition that doesn't scale so fast, then as you start spending more, it's going to cost you more per download or per acquisition or whatever. And then you're going to have more competition, people trying to do something similar. It's going to start affecting prices because obviously Google, Facebook, and all the big guys, create competition and extract value out of that on how they price the ads. So before you realize, then what at the beginning was a very reasonable cost, then ends up eating 12 months or 9 months of value of your customer, right? So. But you are depending on acquiring customers to grow, so then you keep trying to raise more, spend more, and that's I think is quite classic in some of the startups that have grown very fast and then failed very fast. That would be very careful with that because it's very easy to get hooked, right? And then once that you are in the circle, it's very difficult to break it because you're building these expectations with investors, and then they're expecting some growth, and then the only lever that you have there is growing like this. I will be very careful with getting hooked to that because it's common. Now, the way that we think about it is more, paid makes sense when it makes sense, and as a part of a wider plan. So the way we think about it is more like, okay, first we attribute really like only to that activity, how much does it cost us, and then does it pay off in 3 months max to acquire those users, only with those efforts. and then basically, and that's the framework we have. Okay, grow as much as you can, as long as the economics make sense, and don't pass that, right? And then basically inventiveness again can come, but you need to be careful with that because otherwise you can end up in a bad place. So this has allowed us, for example, in paid marketing, to do things like scaling how we do campaigns versus just spending more because the overall number holds it. So we've invested a lot on technology. How do we do campaigns on the long tail at a scalable manner so that our general cost stays the same, but we just do more volume. This is fine, and as long as this is one more channel that you use to acquire customers, it's great, right? It's one more thing that is profitable, it makes sense, and you can keep doing. But as a main way of acquiring, or the only way of acquiring, I would be super, super worried if I would see that.
Makes a lot of sense. I would echo that warning to anyone at the, I guess, the pre-seed or seed stage. We've seen a ton of companies who have grown very rapidly off the back of quite cheap paid, and then really struggled between seed and Series A to scale that and to continue to make the economics make sense. We've also seen it where you might have a customer acquisition cost of $40 and everything's tracking along nicely, and then the algorithm changes and it's $250, and you haven't invested any time or energy on PR or on partnerships or on other channels. And so I think that can really kill a company between seed and A. Certainly.
I think maybe the only place where I think it makes sense to lose money with this is basically if you have a chicken and egg problem, like I call it Uber or maybe Deliveroo, I don't know, but like basically you need to, for your model to make sense economically, you need to have volume and there's a first investment. So imagine you are entering a city, being Uber, and for you it's very important to have the supply and the demand at a certain level. So basically the first, the first volume of customers, you need to say, look, I'm going to lose money with those, but I know that basically once that I get them, and the same with the drivers, then basically the economics make sense, right? But again, very controlled, you understand the economics and you're very careful on deploying it versus just, all right, let's just grow and spend.
Yes. Well, that'd be a good time to bring you in, Jamie. How do you think about that at Deliveroo?
So I agree with everything that you've just described. To answer that specific question, there are instances where we take that approach, not just necessarily with paid digital marketing, but also with things like promotions. In terms of when I think about our overall marketing mix, I thought you said something really interesting about paid digital being, a part of your overall objective. And when I think about how we're trying to grow and our different business problems that end up varying market by market based off our competitive environment, I always step back and look at what is the problem I'm trying to solve? Is it that customers don't actually know that we exist? Is it that customers don't actually understand what we do? Is it that there's a perception of us versus a competitor that I need to break down? Are we perceived as too expensive? And then based off of that, I'll come up with a marketing strategy accordingly. So a really simple example, the awareness and understanding of what we do problem is actually easily solved in a really scrappy way for us, which is probably partnerships, probably similar to what you described, using our restaurants as partners. So if you walk up and down the high street, hopefully, you will see Deliveroo window stickers in every single restaurant that we partner with. And that's been something that over the past year, we've had a big back to basics push to get things like that right. Similarly, if you go on to the Five Guys website, there better be a backlink that says that if you want to order Five Guys for delivery, it takes you then to the Deliveroo app. And thinking through what the customer purchase path looks like, so oh, I'm hungry, I'm home, I want to order, what do I do? That's not just go to Google and search, is what's helped us build out the rest of our marketing mix.
Brilliant. Any other comments on paid? From either Tristan or Katie, I think on paid.
Yeah, maybe the only other thing I'd add around paid that we spent a lot of time thinking about at Nutmeg is just overlaying attribution to it and understanding how different channels are doing different things in your funnel. So for an investment business, we found at Nutmeg that it would take about 30 days for customers to convert, and we had to have between 5 and 6 interactions with those customers to convert. And I remember when I first came into the business, having come from a digital acquisition background at Amex, being told, well, display doesn't work for us. And that's because we were looking on a last click basis. And so the last click you tend to have tends to be PPC or tends to be SEO. And so as you think about how you use the different digital channels in conjunction with a broader marketing mix, a key thing is understanding how those channels work together and fit into the way that your customer interacts, and so you can push them down the funnel in a more effective way. Because what we ended up doing was building an attribution model in-house that enabled us to get a much clearer picture of how customers were interacting with us, and found that actually display media in a lot of ways played a very important role for us in continuing to educate customers and re-engage customers with us as they thought through the decision about whether or not they should invest.
No, not much more, but we're sort of at this interesting stage where we've done basically no pay, and we're just starting now. And we see this as a sort of, we're now generating revenue, so it's much easier to spend money to acquire customers, and just to supercharge growth, basically, to add on to that organic and referral channels, and sort of use it to push into new markets. So one of the things we've struggled with historically, and is getting better, is that Monzo users tend to be 25-year-olds living in London. And now most of them don't live in London, but they're still pretty young. And so again, using paid to push out into those new demographics that otherwise using referral and organic will get us there, but it will just take much longer.
Got it. Okay. In a minute, we're going to start getting some questions in from the audience. So either put your hand up a minute or go on the app. Oh, yeah, what's the app called again?
Slido.com, and the code is U442.
Great. Slido.com, U442. Okay, quick fire round, 30 seconds. If you were starting a company today, or in Katie's case, you can tell us what the answer is, what would you go for? If you could get, you had yourself as a co-founder, maybe one other co-founder. If you could get someone to look after growth in the very, very early days of the company, if you could get someone who is brilliant at performance marketing, or someone who is a PR genius, or someone who could just get the most amazing partnerships for you for either customer acquisition or for getting your suppliers on, or someone who's a pricing guru who could just figure out the mechanics of pricing or get people on. Which one of those 4 skills, or it could be another one, would you go for if you could get one genius, day one of the company? Who would it be?
A growth product person, someone who builds product experiences really, really iteratively with the sole focus of growth. And so whether that's referral or anywhere else in the funnel, just sort of, continually improving that, I think is the way to build an actually scalable growth funnel.
Great. Last one. Okay, so I think we're all agreed, product's got to be core to it. You've got to have an amazing product. Assume your co-founder or yourself are brilliant at product, right? We're going to assume that. Who else? Who's the next hire?
For me, the next hire would be PR, and I say that only because I feel like it's much easier to find someone who can help you in digital marketing from a consultancy basis, or find someone who can help you from a BD perspective and partnerships, but getting that PR right and getting access to the right journalists and getting the coverage you need. I say that from a business like ours, where it's just an absolutely critical channel, would absolutely be my next hire.
So I have a bit of a non-answer for this one, which is I think it really depends on what your business is. So if you're starting a brand like Heist, right? I can't imagine performance marketing necessarily being your first hire as opposed to PR or content or something that is aligned with those brand values. Versus if you're starting like a price comparison website, then like performance marketing definitely has to be your first hire. So I think it really depends on the value proposition that you're creating and the story you're trying to tell consumers, and then figuring out where in your marketing mix does it then make sense to lean into from the start.
So just to clarify, it's just like, it's not the same to have a core product guy or that a growth product person. It's different, right?
Yeah.
So I think what I was kind of saying is that I would
Journalists, and no journalists are interested. So something that Katie's done brilliantly, and you're all going to read about it tomorrow, I hope, or later in the week. Cool. So one of the questions we had coming in on the app was, what are the biggest failures you guys have made, and what have you learned from them? So this could be to do with growth, could be to do with anything it is in your career. But where have you failed miserably and taken something out of that has made you the very successful people you've got today? Who'd like to go for that?
I have one. I have made some bad hiring failures, and I think hiring is just really hard. And I've learned a lot from those failures, where someone comes in and does fantastically in interviews, and then you bring them into the business, and what you saw was not what you get. And to me, we haven't actually talked about that, but hiring is just so critical. Getting the right people into your business is so important. And sometimes you get some good ones, and sometimes you just get it wrong. And I've certainly learned a lot from getting it wrong, and hopefully it's helped with hiring in the future.
Awesome. Anyone else with some terrible failures you can admit to?
Getting really down in the weeds and then you get hit by the things that you haven't been thinking about 3 months later. Happens to me every 3 months. Where you're just super, super focused on the problems that you're facing now. And so then by the time you see the problems that are coming up, it's too late. And then you go start hiring for it, and you start trying to ramp up, and then you're trying to do 50 different things at once, and it makes it much more difficult. So we've had that for Paige, where we basically were planning to do a fundraise later than we did it. Later than we did it, and so we brought that forward by 6 months, which accelerated everything. But we didn't have the team in place, and so now we're running paid with no one actually running it, and trying to hire for it at the same time, which is not that fun.
Sounds tough. Jamie, what about you?
I would say the lesson that I keep learning over and over again is to not go for the sophisticated, complex, perfect solution, rather to keep something really, really simple and just move on it. So to give you an example, when we were launching Deliveroo Plus across the world, Deliveroo Plus is our subscription service. So you pay a monthly fee and you get unlimited free delivery. We agonized internally over and over again, is this product going to fit in this market? Is it going to work? Do we lower the price? Do we raise the price? Do we need to add new features? And when I say agonized, I mean like really agonized, like fought about it over and over and over again. And finally came to realize that this wasn't a one-way door, it could be a two-way door, and we just needed to get it out there. In the months that we were spending agonizing over it, we didn't have another solution. It wasn't like we were trying to, there was option 1 and option 2, and which one do we go with? It was move or don't move. And we ended up eventually moving, and it's been a great success, and I've been kicking myself that we didn't move on it sooner.
Love it. Jose?
I mean, for me, it's basically getting caught in the logic that you are in whatever company. So it's very interesting, but like, you go to I've been working on several companies now, and the worldview or the reality understanding, etc., is very specific to that company for whatever reason. How founders were doing, the perception of the world, the type, the team composition, etc. Very easy to suddenly think about the world like that, and then basically follow that. That's very easy because you are there, and then you're going to execute well, and things are going to move in that direction. But then what I found like super valuable is to get out of the building and literally talk to customers about what they're doing, how they're perceiving your product, how you're reaching out to them. And it's refreshing because basically sometimes they tell you things that are so obvious, and then you go like, oh my god, like, all this chatter and all these technicalities and all these things, and I'm missing like you're missing like the big point. So that's something that I'm trying to do a lot more recently because I think that sometimes it's very easy to get caught up on your view of the world.
Very good advice. Katie, we had a question come through for you, talking about PR, and the question was, how do you build your relationship with journalists if you're not using consultants, so you don't have budget, or you think PR consultants are useless, whatever your opinion might be? How do you start to build relationships with journalists?
Well, I can tell you what we're doing with Harness Wealth, and then I can tell you my perspective on it. So we did use a PR consultant to help us, and that was a way for us to get access to the right journalists at the right time to be able to launch it. But PR is a combination of two things. First, you have to have someone within your team that can do PR, and that involves training, that involves messaging tracks, that involves understanding what you're saying and how you're saying it and how you want to position yourselves. And you have to get the right person within the team to do it, and it's something that, if it doesn't come as naturally, time needs to be spent on it. The other piece is getting access to journalists and getting them to care about what you're doing, and that piece is really hard as well. And there's lots of ways you can do that in a more scrappy way, which is just being identifying the right people, going through to the right publications that meet your target audience, and figuring out who's writing about you, and figuring out a way to get an introduction to them. And when you get that introduction to them, making sure that you're selling your business in the right way, and you're talking about why they should care about what you're doing. So I think if you're having to do it yourself, it takes a lot of persistence, and it takes a lot of trying to get introductions, and it takes a lot of work both within your company as well to get the right person positioned and to make sure you're clear on messaging tracks.
Brilliant. Do we have any journalists in the house? We had someone from the FT who was here half an hour ago, so I don't know if they're hiding somewhere. Or do we have any either current journalists or former journalists who would like to give some advice? No one's brave enough to admit it. Okay. We're going to move the conversation on in a minute to just talking about technology more general and the state of European tech. Before we do that, does anyone have any really specific questions that you'd love to ask the panel for your own company or whatever it might be? Any other questions that you'd like to ask? Yes.
Yes, I'm co-founder of the direct-to-consumer fashion business. Just done our seed round, so we're on the kind of VC train now, and it's important that we show sort of consistent, steady growth. And for us, kind of the only scalable channel is paid marketing. So we're all sort of probably already in that trap. I'm definitely interested. What other channels do you see as being scalable? PR we like as well, but it gives us spikes and things like that, and it's not as controllable and scalable as paid. So, what are other good channels?
What are the other channels? As a fashion guru,
I would say no. No, I mean, what does your business do?
Yes, we make custom-made menswear. So clothing, people show us pictures of stuff they like the look of, and we make it for them.
Yeah, I mean, so I don't have an answer, to be honest. Like it's you need to. I mean, for us, for example, anything that is search related works very good, but because we attack in fashion, but like from a point of view of we have 5 million products and we have a lot of content that basically serves that, so we have a lot of depth there that we can play in very economic way to acquire like users at long tail. And then I think like businesses maybe more like that are more just maybe if you are selling like a specific value proposition, you need channels you can explain that value proposition. In particular, so normally the type of channels that I've seen working there well are display or Facebook ads, etc. But basically where you can explain a bit the concept and why you're different and so on. Unfortunately, those are expensive. So basically what it means is that your value proposition has to be very strong so that you have a lot of repeat users and repeat customers that come back to you and therefore you can afford to do that. Plus then, as we were saying before, like I think you need to think about, is there some I don't know, social aspect to this where you basically, it's menswear, there's a pal kind of story where you share with your friend, etc. But you need to really work on that. What is that concept and why would people do it? And I personally would prefer spending time on that because, as Monzo said, I mean that's not like a one-off idea that can grow. While, for example, if you go down the path of Facebook or display ads, the thing gets expensive, as we just said. So really, like before you start ramping up and increasing everyone's expectations, I think it's important that you explore that at length. But I'm not sure if there's an easy solution there.
This is some thoughts coming from someone who's been in financial services her entire career, so take it with a grain of salt. I don't come from the fashion world, but just a couple ideas popped in my head when you asked that. We haven't yet talked about influencers, but influencers can play a really important role in spreading and be advocates for your brand and are nice ways, especially for fashion brands, to introduce people to their product and get them to talk about your product. We also have talked a lot about referrals, which is always like an effective way, just having a very seamless referral mechanism to help those people that you already have on your platform who love you talk about you more, like make it easy for them. And then we haven't talked about sort of the own social channels that you have, and especially for a fashion brand, it feels like there's just tons of content that you can produce that will help build awareness and help get people excited about your brand and what you stand for. So,
fantastic. Thank you, Kate. I've got a general question here from Matt. Matt writes, often growth is super scrappy and sometimes questionably legal. Think Airbnb and Craigslist. In hyper-competitive markets, is this necessary to get ahead? Tristan.
Start with the financial services
Yeah,
guy.
we're very legal. and compliant. I know there's this, growth hacker was the big term, right, 2 or 3 years ago, and I think that's falling out of fashion now because it's very easy to read into growth hacking. You just do lots of hacky, short-term wins that don't build any sort of scalable viral loop or acquisition loop. And you need to be, they can work in the short term if you're trying to do something specific, but you need to be building that long-term sort of funnel that just goes round and round and round and brings in new people into the top, provided it's not super leaky and you're losing them all out halfway through. And so I think probably most of the time these sort of growth hacks, especially the barely legal ones, aren't worthwhile. But at the beginning, it can be super, super useful. So for us, that was paid, right? It's totally legal, but getting our first 20,000 people onto a waiting list through Facebook ads was hugely, hugely powerful because you just have this group of people that already want the
conversation about growth and using paid where it makes sense for really targeted reasons, where, as Jose says, you understand the economics, you're not going to get hooked to it, but also deeply understanding what are the other channels, what are the PR channels, what are the influencer channels, what are the partnerships, all the clever things Jamie was talking about with Deliveroo. So I think that rounds it out, that part of the conversation really nicely. Let's talk a little bit more broadly about European technology and where we are. We're sitting here in First Minute Capital's shiny offices in the innovation hub that is Kensington. We are we're very lucky to be here. First Minute is an amazing story, but it's burst onto the scene in the last year. It's this emerging superpower in European seed, backed by 30 unicorn founders, backed by over 100 LPs, including Tencent, Atomico, and it has really, I think, been one of the first seed funds to be pan-European and also transatlantic. And it's all happening here in London. So it's a fantastic group, and it's a fantastic, I think, example of where European technology has grown. We're also sitting here in London, in Europe, and despite the best efforts of our slightly dysfunctional politicians, I personally remain immensely proud of where we are in London and Europe. I moved my company when I started my company. For me, it was an obvious move 5 years ago to start it in America. We moved to America and we did it then. And having moved back after we sold about a year ago, I've been blown away by the step change that we've seen here in the UK. It's become an amazing hotbed of talent, of incredibly brilliant companies, brilliant people. I think it's awesome that we're sitting here with 4 people who've helped to create enormous value here in Britain. Only one of whom, guessing from accents, is actually British. We've got people from the States and Spain, and I think that's fantastic. Where do you all now see Europe? Where do you see the UK? Where do you see Europe as it stands against, for example, Silicon Valley, New York? How strong a place are we in at the moment? And what do we have to do as European technology to catch up with the US? Christian, maybe we can start with you.
I think the biggest thing I think we need to see more successful exits in Europe, or even just sort of unicorns and that then expand. For a variety of reasons, we see it sort of manifested in practicalities that people in London don't value share options very much. And if you go to Silicon Valley, you can go and see people who've been made millionaires because they joined early in a company. If people don't value that, then it's very, very hard to hire amazing people early on because you're not going to be able to pay them enough. And so I think that is a sort of a good example of how, as European tech continues to grow, and hopefully we see more and more successful companies come out of that, it just hopefully forms a sort of self-perpetuating circle that is really, really useful for the new companies building.
Brilliant, makes a lot of sense. Casey, what about you?
So I definitely agree with everything you said. I think the only other thing I'd add, and I don't know if that's controversial, but it's easier to raise money in the US than it is in the UK, and that just makes a big difference. That means there's more businesses, and that means there's more happening, and that means there's more assets to be able to grow them. And I would say that's one of the big things that I think is helpful for European businesses to catch up, is just getting more funding to be able to launch.
And when you say easy to raise money, more funds or different attitudes from investors?
I would say both. I would say there's more funds, and I would say, based on what I've seen and what I've heard from friends who have done something similar, it's easier to raise from those, is my understanding. I'm curious what First Minute thinks about
No,
that.
I'm curious to see what you think. How do European investors need to change their mindset? How do they need to?
I think there's less. I think there's more identification of problems that businesses can have, and less identification of opportunities of where businesses can go. And a lot of that is very likely just comes from the American mentality of everything is great and believing in the vision and going for it, and that doesn't always work. But I think that has a lot to do with it.
Really interesting. Jamie, what do you think?
I think the other thing that feeds into what you described is that it's easier to scale in the US. So you just have this massive country, and yes, there are differences between New York and California and West Virginia and Texas and whatnot, but not the same degree of differences that you face trying to scale across Europe. And so Deliveroo's in 13 markets. Scaling across those 13 markets has been incredibly challenging and a very much a learning experience for me. But I do feel bullish that out of those types of challenges comes innovation. And so as startups here think about scaling, we were talking about this earlier, there's London and we're kind of all in a London bubble, but then when you start to think about outside of London, the rest of UK, going into continental Europe, how you're going to be able to create efficiencies in what you're developing, is able to tackle different languages, different customer mindsets, different values, beliefs, is critical.
You have to rank tech cities across the world in terms of where's the best place to build a tech business between London, Berlin, Paris, Silicon Valley, New York, Austin. What would be your top three?
Oh gosh, probably say Seattle right now. I think Seattle is a great place to build a tech business in terms of talent that's available. It's not quite like the hotspot that SF is. Whereas, if you think about kind of the curve of maturity in this space, you could almost argue that in San Francisco there's a ton of opportunity, but you also see a downside of that, right? You see housing prices are really inflated. You see people jumping jobs kind of every 6 to 8 months because there's so many opportunities, and the war for talent is really hard because of that. Whereas the benefit, that we would have here, that I think Seattle has, but is farther along the curve, definitely the benefit that London has is that it's more emerging in that respect. And so even though there are disadvantages, there are also advantages to that.
That definitely resonates with me as somebody who spends a lot of time in Seattle with Microsoft, as a city with enormous talent, Microsoft and Amazon and others, and yet you just don't see that volume of startups. So I think it's ripe for startup.
Also no state income tax.
Exactly.
Helps.
Even better. Jose, are you a proud European technologist? How are we doing it?
So, look, I was studying in the US, came here, what was it, 2010, 11, yeah, and to start my first company. It was like, desert, like there was nothing going on. It was still very incipient, and then so I tried to build this technology company. It didn't work out so well, and then went to Southeast Asia actually for 2.5, 3 years, and then I came back, and honestly, I've been blown away. So I'm actually very positive, not only because I've seen it through a little bit of time, and then but just like if you just see what's happening in the ecosystem, like how many unicorns at the end is not that relevant, but like I would say companies that have global ambitions that are going to be global champions. We have in Europe, and then we have more and more. I think like the fact that we need to think global from the get-go because we're just in a small country or smaller country pushes a lot of the companies to think global, like Spotify from the get-go. And that ambition is coming through, like the investors are also sophisticating themselves. We're building more of these companies. That means that we have more talent developed in the startup thinking and ecosystem and more qualified people. I think it's happening, right? Will be better than Silicon Valley. I think that doesn't matter as long as we have a strong ecosystem. So yeah, I'm super positive. I'm super excited to see like a lot of the companies succeeding here. And you guys build up capital. You're building like mega champions globally, hopefully. So yeah, very, very positive.
Awesome. I think we've got time for maybe 2 questions. We'll take 2 questions at the same time, and then we'll wrap it up. One from the lady in the back.
I head up partnerships for a podcasting business, and part of our growth acquisition is either trying to make people switch from the Apple podcasting app, which is obviously no easy feat, and also trying to persuade people who've never listened to podcasts to download our app. So there's kind of the switchers and also new customers, and obviously we find that we have to speak to them slightly differently. I wondered if you had any tips in terms of different strategies to kind of acquire different types of customers who are familiar with your type of product versus the ones that don't even know that sort of product exists.
Okay, perfect. We'll hold that thought. And then is there only one other question? Yes?
Hi there, that's fine. So myself and Matt here have come a company called Plants. It's a plant-based meal subscription service. We found some of our digital channels are a little bit more expensive than we might like at the moment, so we're looking to broaden that out. One quite niche thing we're looking at is, what niche for us is like direct marketing, so how we can appear in like physical spaces. And it's just something we're super interested to explore, so be interested to hear how you guys have had any success with that, or any interesting examples of using that yourself.
Brilliant. Okay, so how do we get people onto your podcasting app from a very established incumbent, and then sort of physical retail sort of
Direct
marketing. Okay.
etc.
Jane, maybe on physical, you mentioned your restaurant campaign.
Yeah, so physical is huge for us, slightly different than what you're describing, but we find that both our in-store signage, so like in-store merchandising, which is us partnering with restaurants to get something displayed in their windows, as well as honestly our riders, like how many Deliveroo riders you see walking around London, are huge acquisition channels. And so, I think the thing for you to be thinking about is like, if you want to do something like that, where can you get the visibility for the cost that you're willing to pay? And so do you have, high football traffic, or is there a way to get football traffic? Like, are there different partners that you can actually leverage their space, and, what could you give them that they would be willing to then showcase your brand? Those are the type of things that we'd be thinking about.
Terrific. Tristan, maybe on the question about how do you tackle incumbents, you've tackled some of the biggest companies in the world. How do you do it?
I get a lot of Instagram ads for all the time, so. I haven't bought those, so maybe that's yeah, so I'd be interested to hear, because part of me thinks that actually having Apple Podcasts and having big names is actually really useful for you, in that getting people to even sort of comprehend the idea of a podcast, if it's done by Apple or Google or any of these others, and then showing them, hey, this app that you use is fine, but there's a much, much better way, feels to me like an easier play than sort of, at least initially, than going out and trying to convert people who don't understand what podcasts are at all. So my gut says focusing on that would be more beneficial, because once people are sold on podcasts, I think it's very, very sticky medium, and so once you start listening, you keep listening, and you just have this sort of urge to always find a better podcast app. Does advertising on podcasts work for a podcast app?
We're seeing mixed reviews. We get our creators to plug our app at the front of their show, which then goes on Apple, and we see mixed reviews.
Terrific. Brilliant. I think we're going to wrap it up there. I think we have learned a huge amount. I certainly have, about the very strategic and tactical things we can do to grow, how we can avoid sorts of other tactics. So that's been, I think, hugely valuable. I think we've come away hopefully feeling incredibly enthused about London tech, European tech, despite what happens with Brexit. And I want to say a huge thank you to the panel. You were all role models for everyone here. You're building incredible businesses. Long may it continue. And thank you so much for joining us at First Minute Capital.